You're listening to the CyberWire Network, powered by N2K.
N2K has teamed up with AWS to bring you AWS in Orbit, a groundbreaking new series that explores the impact of space technology, cloud computing, and generative AI. Hi, I'm Maria Varmazes, and in this series, I speak with industry leaders to give you a nuanced understanding of how these technologies are revolutionizing sectors like sustainability, critical infrastructure, and cybersecurity. So if you're drawn to big ideas and are curious how space and cloud technologies are impacting life here on Earth, this series is for you. Follow the T- Space Daily podcast to catch every episode of AWS in Orbit and visit space.n2k.com/AWS to stay ahead of the curve.
Struggling to secure on-prem apps with modern identity? Don't worry, you're not alone. Join industry leaders from Fortune 500 organizations to secure your apps on any cloud with any IDP, regardless of your environment's complexity. Meet Strata's identity orchestration platform, Mavericks. Say goodbye to the headaches of app refactoring and legacy tech debt. With identity orchestration, you can modernize legacy apps to use MFA or passwordless authentication in a few weeks, migrate from one IDP to another, and so much more without changing the app. No matter your IAM use case, Strata extends the value of your current identity investments. And the best part? You can try it for free today. Visit strata.io/cyberwire to share your biggest identity challenge, and they'll hook you up with a complimentary pair of AirPods Pro. Don't miss out. Visit strata.io/cyberwire. That's strata.io/cyberwire.
OpenAI's continuing turmoil. Crypto firm sustains API attack. Konni campaign phishes with a Russian document as bait. LockBit's third-party compromise of Canadian government personal data. Ukraine removes senior security official under suspicion of graft. Dave Bittner sits down with Steve Winterfeld from Akamai to discuss emerging threats in the financial services sector. And Idaho National Laboratory sustains a data breach. I'm Trey Hester, filling in for Dave Bittner with your CyberWire Intel briefing for Tuesday, November 21st, 2023. Turmoil at OpenAI continues as its workers threaten mass resignation if the board stays in place. 738 of OpenAI's 770 employees have now signed a letter demanding the restoration of ousted CEO Sam Altman and his co-founder Greg Brockman and the resignation of the board that fired them. Wired reports that the letter includes a threat to quit the company, possibly to join a new venture headed by Altman. OpenAI was founded with the mission to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits all of humanity, and Friday's dismissal, couched as a response to what the board characterized as Altman's lack of candor, suggests that the new board believed Altman's leadership had drifted from that mission. The organization's structure was probably unstable from the outset. It's a not-for-profit research institution, self-consciously animated by an idealistic humanitarian vision that simultaneously oversaw a capped-for-profit company characterized by the aggressive and fast-moving optimism typical of Silicon Valley startups. The Atlantic has an account, based on discussions with insiders who spoke on a condition of anonymity, that suggests OpenAI was riven by two rival futurist visions, one utopian, the other dystopian, but both in their own way, representing an extreme picture of artificial intelligence's potentialities. Shortly after firing Altman, OpenAI's board approached rival Anthropic about a possible merger, an approach, the information says, that Anthropic quickly declined. Subsequent reports indicated that a number of OpenAI customers were considering moving to competitors, including Anthropic, Microsoft, and Google. For now, and pending further developments, Microsoft appears to be the winner. Redmond hired both Altman and Brockman to run a, quote, new advanced AI research team, and the former OpenAI leaders seem likely to attract much of the talent that may defect from their old company. As recently as yesterday afternoon, however, The Verge was reporting that Altman's return to OpenAI remained an open possibility, and according to Bloomberg, that would be agreeable to Microsoft as well. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella stated, quote, irrespective of where Sam is, he's still working with Microsoft, end quote. We note in full disclosure that Microsoft is a CyberWire partner. The operators behind the Konni rat have been observed using a Russian language document, Western assessments of the progress of the special military operation, as fish bait. Researchers at Fortinet report that the malicious Word document contains a dropper that installs a remote access Trojan that serves as both an information stealer and a remote code execution threat. The researchers conclude that the threat involves an advanced toolset employed by a sophisticated threat actor within a Word document using batch scripts and DLL files. The payload incorporates a UAC bypass and encrypted communication with a C2 server, enabling the threat actor to execute privileged commands. Fortinet does not speculate about targeting, but circumstantially, the intended victims appeared to be Russian. Fortinet also does not discuss attribution, but Malpedia connects Konni with APT-37, a North Korean cyber espionage actor whose principal targets since the group's discovery in 2012 have been South Korean political organizations, as well as Japan, Vietnam, Russia, Nepal, China, India, Romania, Kuwait, and other parts of the Middle East. 2 Ukrainian senior cybersecurity officials were removed from office yesterday, resigning as they faced criminal corruption charges. The 2 officials, familiar to the cybersecurity and defense sectors, are Yuri Shikol, head of the State Special Communication Services of Ukraine, and Viktor Zora, the SSSCIP's deputy head. They're suspected of establishing 2 shell companies to rig bids for software, the excess charges for which were skimmed off by the principals. The amount alleged to have been stolen amounts to $1.7 million US. Both senior officials deny wrongdoing and say they look forward to vindication. Mr. Zora worked closely with U.S. officials and agencies, notably with CISA. Taiwanese crypto trading firm Kronos Research has sustained a theft of approximately $26 million after an attacker gained unauthorized access to its API keys, Bitcoin.com reports. The company stated on Sunday, quote, despite it being a sizable amount, Kronos remains in good standing. All losses will be covered internally, no partners will be affected, end quote. Kronos did, however, halt its trading services on Saturday while it investigated the incident. The Treasury Board of Canada's Secretariat has disclosed a third-party data breach in which contractors handling information of members of the Canadian Armed Forces, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and other Canadian government employees were compromised by LockBit. The 2 affected contractors were Brookfield Global Relocation Services and Serva Canada. Bleeping Computer says the compromised information goes back to 1999. While Canadian authorities didn't offer an attribution of the attack to any particular group, LockBit, the privateering and profit-motivated Russian ransomware gang, has claimed the Serva compromise and is probably responsible for the breach at Brookfield Global Relocation Services as well. According to Bleeping Computer, LockBit says it has 1.5 terabytes of stolen documents and that Serva declined to pay the ransom demanded. And finally, the U.S. Department of Energy is dealing with a data breach that compromised a large quantity of personal information belonging to personnel at the Idaho National Laboratory. Cyberscoop reports that SiegeSec has claimed responsibility for the attack. The breach has apparently affected the National Lab's Oracle HCM system. SiegeSec claims to have obtained hundreds of thousands of user, employee, and citizen data, which include names, social security numbers, bank account information, and addresses. SiegeSec hasn't said why it's hit the lab, but it has shown complicated motives in the past. It's a sometimes politically but often financially motivated threat group that describes itself as more black hat than activist. The breach remains under investigation, and the story is still developing. Coming up after the break, Dave Bittner sits down with Steve Winterfeld from Akamai to discuss emerging threats in the financial services sector. Stick around.
With over 8,000 threat hunters analyzing over 65 trillion signals daily, Microsoft works tirelessly with the federal government to keep our nation's data secure. This 30-plus year partnership is driving mission innovation that is secure by design. Whether optimizing your existing defenses or tackling advanced threats with AI, Microsoft gives you the intelligence and the automation you need to defend at mission scale. Let's work together to stay ahead of emerging threats and secure your mission anywhere. Learn more at aka.ms/fedcyber. That's aka.ms/fedcyber. This episode is supported by Code Comments, an original podcast from Red Hat. Be honest, do you comment your code? You know, when you're working on a project and you leave behind a small note in the code, a code comment, to help others learn what isn't clear in the code. Sometimes we leave comments for other people. Sometimes we leave comments for ourselves, a type of breadcrumbs. There's a lot of work required to bring a project from purchase to production, and the documentation doesn't always cover changing team dynamics. So the Code Comments podcast, which is hosted by Jamie Parker, he's a Red Hatter and an experienced engineer. In every episode, Jamie recounts the stories of experienced technologists from all across the industry who share what they've learned from implementing new technology. So if you're interested in real stories from real people going through real change, check out the Code Comments podcast. You can search for Code Comments in your podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. My thanks to Code Comments for their support.
Our own Dave Bittner sits down with Steve Winterfeld from Akamai to discuss emerging threats in the financial services sector.
So today we're talking about some of the threats that you all are tracking when it comes to financial services. You recently put out a report on this. Can we start off with just some high-level stuff here? Can you give us a little bit of the lay of the land, kind of where we find ourselves when it comes to folks coming at financial services?
Sure, yeah, and this is our State of the Internet report. We do these on both financial sector, commerce sector, and then things like API security or DDoS. And so this one was focused on financial services. We actually had the FS-ISAC, the Financial Service Information Sharing and Analysis Center, kind of opened this report up. They talked about some API security recommendations, some of the DDoS challenges, because that continues to have significant impacts in different financial organizations. And then some of the stuff we see coming for resiliency. And then again, we jump into our research here at Akamai, and it's based on our security capabilities. So, we won't talk about things like endpoint security. We protect the edge, we protect segmentation, and so it's around things like that where we have visibility. The one that doesn't surprise me, of course, is APIs. Transformation is driving APIs rapidly. It started with open banking in Europe. We have API here growing at 65%. Right behind that is the bot attacks. We've seen that increase over 1 trillion hits. That's grown at 69%. Still hitting that edge is DDoS attack. Last year, financial services were number 2 in DDoS. This year, back beating out gaming to number 1 in DDoS attack. So really the edge is under systematic and, continuing in speed and scope and complexity attacks.
I think it's fair to say that the folks in financial services industry have a reputation for being well prepared for these sorts of things. Is that your perception as well? Does that track with where we find ourselves?
It absolutely does. I mean, they have to be because the financial services built around trust. You and I both want access to our wealth. What I'll jokingly call what I have wealth. And so, we have to protect that trust. Now, the Fortune 5,000 banks have a lot of resources. The local community banks don't. We're getting attacks across that entire spectrum. And we've seen this increase. A while ago we have regional changes. So it was the U.S. was most attacked. Now Europe and the Middle East and Africa, really Europe is the most attacked, growing at layer 3, 4 in attacks because of the war in Europe. So we continue to see great preparation, but the adversary continues to come across that entire spectrum.
Where do you see us heading in terms of trends with the organizations? I'm thinking of the kinds of things that they're putting in place to protect themselves.
So it's interesting you say that because a lot of this is coming out of those transformation changes. So as we've had web pages out there a long time, they're well protected. But we're moving to, different environments, different methodologies of development. DevSecOps, a lot of banks are very conservative. Some are moving into that now. Some haven't been in as long as other industries. And so, containers, APIs, a lot of things that are newer, and we don't have the same maturity of controls around that. So we're seeing, shadow APIs, we're seeing API abuse, all those access controls. If you look at the OWASP top 10 for APIs, all of those are something that we see a lot of the banks focusing on. Continuing to see banks also focus, and this is really not banks, but a lot of my peers, a lot of the CSOs I'm talking to, we're shifting from protecting the edge to minimizing that impact, minimizing the dwell time. So ransomware, we put out a report showing that they're actually focused on, making money off of threatening to expose your data. And so more and more of us are saying, how quickly can we detect somebody exfilling data? So that would be the other shift I've really seen a lot of.
One of the things that caught my eye in the report was the degree to which insurance companies are finding themselves a target. Any insights there?
So, insurance and healthcare are both interesting sectors because there is a lot of fraud associated with both of those. This is the first year we broke out subverticals, and banking being the most attacked. Then there's kind of a mix of a bunch of smaller numbers, fintech and trading and things. And then finally insurance. And we see insurance, they're scraping insurance data of the members. They're trying to, put in false claims. So it's a mix of trying to attack the customer and attack the company. But the fraud in both those is just really spiking.
Based on the information that you all have gathered here, what are your recommendations?
So I think, it kind of follows the attack patterns we're seeing, so there's still things that are very traditional. So the cyber hygiene, the blocking and tackling, the basic things are very important. But then we say, probably my most common conversation is around visibility, situational awareness. Do you know where shadow APIs? Do you know when the next 0 day comes out? And we've seen, actually seen threats investing in buying 0 days, threat actors. And so how quickly can you detect if you have that protocol or if you're using that vendor? We've talked about software build of materials. Now we have SBOMs for where do we have those protocols in our environment? So how quickly can we do those kind of things to know where our threats are and have visibility? I mentioned earlier that abuse. People legitimately using your APIs in abusive ways to scrape customer data or try to aggregate a threat. And so how do you know what's going on there? DDoS, we've seen record numbers, a quick review of DDoS attacking your web page at layer 7. new records being set there, attacking your infrastructure, either taking away bandwidth or taking away the actual CPU cycles. We've seen, a great number of new and innovative threats there. And last, going after your DNS. And so with these, have you looked at all of those DDoS attacks, and have you seen what the latest records are? And are you about 10% over that? This is something that, we need to get our playbooks out. We need to refresh them. We need to make sure that we're well coordinating if you're using a third party, as most do for DDoS, and that we're not going to lose 20 minutes of downtime because we're not well coordinated. And then, the last is managing attack surfaces. We talk about third-party scripts. While banking doesn't use, JavaScripts as much as a lot of, say, commerce or other industries, it still could be impactful. So are we looking at that kind of an environment? Are we looking at our financial aggregators and understanding what's going on in that environment? So are we expanding our scope?
Where do you suppose we stand in terms of compliance? What do you, as you look toward the horizon, what are you seeing there?
Again, a lot of regional differences. We'll talk about kind of the basics. Europe is probably the number one driver. A lot of compliance coming out. So the first was around things like open banking. So that drove a lot of API security. The next was around privacy, GDPR, and other things. And so that drove quite a bit of, change on how are we managing privacy? How are we doing that? We see PCI DSS, coming out with a new version that has requirements around things like your scripts, JavaScripts, and stuff like that. I think the biggest one I see coming is actually resiliency. So we have DORA coming out of the EU, and this Resiliency Act is really going to, I think, kind of come into America the same way that privacy did. We're going to start to see a lot of states looking at what do we expect for resiliency. That's another place I would encourage everybody to start to prepare.
That's Dave Bittner sitting down with Steve Winterfeld from Akamai. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. You can email us at cyberwire@n2k.com. Your feedback helps us ensure we're delivering the information and insights that help keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin and senior producer Jennifer Iben. Our mixer is me, with original music by Elliot Peltzman. The show is written by our editorial staff. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Trey Hester, filling in for Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow.